Okay. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are located in the world. Welcome to this UM6P ESAFE webinar series. My name is Mohammed Boulif. I'm a professor at the School of Agriculture, Fertilization and Environmental Sciences of UM6P. I'm pleased and honored today to moderate the webinar on behalf of Professor Yesri, Director of ESAFE, a webinar that is brought to you through the fruitful collaboration between ESAFE UM6P, OCP-Africa, the African Plant Nutrition Institute, APNI, and the Regional Universities Forum, RUFORUM. This webinar is one of the series put together by the collaborating parties to enhance the scientific communication among researchers within the African continent and abroad, on one hand, and promote education of youth undertaking graduate studies in African agricultural universities. Today's speaker is Dr. SHAMIE ZINGORE of APNI. Dr. SHAMIE ZINGORE is a native of the Great Republic of Zimbabwe, where he studied and obtained the bachelor's and the master's degrees in soil science from the University of Zimbabwe in Harare. He later moved to the Netherlands to study at the Wageningen Agricultural University, where he has earned his PhD in agronomy and farming systems in 2006. Presently, he is working at the African Plant Nutrition Institute based in Bengrir, Morocco, more precisely at the Agricultural Innovation Technology Transfer Center, located at the experimental farm of UM6P in Bengrir. And Dr. Zingore has is an experienced soil scientist, agronomist, with a keen interest in agricultural development in Africa. Dr. SHAMIE ZINGORE is a talented and result-oriented program director with a demonstrated history of coordinating and managing research and development programs to support sustainable crop production, intensification in Sub-Saharan Africa. He has over 10 years of experience in agronomy research in over 10 countries in East, South, and West Africa. He also has a good record in strategic planning and scientific leadership in agricultural research and development, working with the global fertilizer industry and a wide range of stakeholders to improve food security for marginalized smallholder farmers in Africa. Dr. Zingore, we need more of you in Africa. Today, Dr. Zingore will share with us his knowledge and his rich presentation entitled Spatio-Temporal Patterns in Maize Nutrient Responses and their implications for fertilizer recommendations in smallholder farming systems. Dr. Zingore will have about 35 to 40 minutes for his presentation, and then we will follow up by 35 to 40 minutes question and answer from the viewers. Okay, without any further ado, I will leave the floor to Dr. SHAMIE ZINGORE to start his presentation. Dr. SHAMIE ZINGORE, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Bolith. It's a real great pleasure for me to be presenting today's webinar. APNI highly honored to partner with UM6P, ESAFE, and the other institutions that are coordinating this highly informative and educating seminar series. So for the benefit of our audience, and I'd like to also extend my greetings to all our audience around the world, and appreciate your joining today's seminar. And I really look forward to the information that I will present, and also the follow-up session where I'd like to hear back from you on the topic of our discussion today, and then I'll be also pleased to answer any questions for clarification, based on my presentation. So for the benefit of those who may not be familiar with APNI, I'll just take a few minutes to provide a quick overview of our institution. This is the fourth presentation as part of this webinar series from APNI. So I would imagine a large part of our audience would be familiar with our work already, but just in case there are some who are joining us for the first time attending an APNI presentation, I just want to take a few minutes to introduce my institution as well. So APNI is a relatively new organization that was established in March last year, but we have a long history in our research, because APNI was actually formed building on the work of the International Plant Nutrition Institute. And I actually worked for APNI in Africa for 10 years before we migrated to our new operations under APNI. And because of that history, we bring a lot of expertise and experience. And our mission is basically focusing on innovating plant nutrition through evidence-based practices for a resilient and food security Africa. So we have the unique position as APNI to work in a very specific area in agricultural research, which pertains to the role of plant nutrition in sustainable management of crop production systems. We have a presence. Our headquarters, as indicated, is in Bengueria, and we are hosted by UM6P University, and we're working from the experimental farm. And we greatly positioned also to be affiliated with great university, UM6P. So our affiliation and collaboration with the university gives us a strong reach, especially in supporting research and academic programs. And then we have our regional office for North Africa, which looks after our North Africa work from CETAT, and our West Africa office in Yamoussoukro in Cote d'Ivoire. And then we also have an office in Nairobi, which is coordinating our activities in East Africa. So we have three key areas of strategic research that our new programs will be focusing on. The first area is on climate smart plant nutrition, which focuses on providing nutrient management solutions that respond to the variable and highly unpredictable climatic conditions, especially in the dryland areas. And then a second program of activity, which is a relatively new area of research, is the area on soil health. And in that aspect, we look at how management of soil health connects to plant health, animal health, and human health as well. And we bring these areas into our main research theme of precision plant nutrition, which focuses on developing of methodologies and then also on an analysis of data and information to develop site-specific and precision nutrient management information that can be used to increase fertilizer use efficiency, crop productivity, but also minimizing the negative environmental effects of inappropriate management of nutrients. For impact, we position our work to work within value chains, both from the input side and the output side. We recognize there are all these other value chain interventions that need to be put in place to ensure sustainability in nutrient management at the farm level. And then we also have a program on communication and capacity building that aims to disseminate information, but also build capacity for plant nutrition for a worldwide range of stakeholders as well. So this is the overall, and we are going to work broadly across the continent with a primary focus on tree cropping systems. My colleague Thomas Orbiter, our Director for Business Development, gave an overview of some of our interest in perennial crops, and we also have another program on annual crops, which will mostly focus on zero-based cropping systems. And that second program on zero cropping-based systems will form the main part of my presentation today. Yeah, so having gone through the overview of APNI, it's now time to turn attention to
May I ask you, Dr. Zingore, just to give an idea about the number of researchers working at APNI and the number of nationalities?
Oh, great. So our total staff complement across the institution is about 20 currently. That includes our research and administrative staff. And we have quite a wide breadth of experiences, actually. That's one key area also I wanted to highlight, from business development, communications, climate, smart plant nutrition, precision agriculture, data analysis, and then also experience in annual and free crop systems as well. And we have staff from different parts of the world, including Asia, Europe, the USA, and then also African staff contingent with background in East, Southern Africa, and West Africa and North Africa as well.
Presentation about the African Nutrition, the Plant Nutrition Institute, and I guess it's about time. Our viewers are waiting for you to get in the heart of the matter, which is your topic about the spatio-temporal patterns in soil fertility and recommendation to the crop to fertilizing crops. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's now time to turn attention to the presentation, and this is quite a wide topic, which has been a subject of intense and widespread research, on the continent. So it's hard to do justice to such a wide topic in a 40-minute presentation. So I will aim to pay attention to some of our research outputs that we have generated in our current and past work, at APNI, and then also provide a very broad scan of the key issues that have been developed in research, and then also, the gaps and the future needs, in this space. So my presentation will be in 4 parts. I'll first of all give the context and the background information on the characteristics of the maize system, because this is very essential for us to understand some of the issues on the spatial patterns of nutrient responses, and then the temporal trends as well. And in my last part of the presentation, I will address the issue of nutrient management recommendations with a specific reference to one decision support tool that we have made, major investments in research, what we call the nutrient expert decision support tool. So I will immediately go to the first part of the introduction. I just want to highlight the significance of maize on the continent, and this is probably provide justification on why it's been such a high priority crop for both research and development investments. So if we look at the crop production situation in Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, this excludes South Africa and North Africa. Maize currently occupies about 34 million hectares of land that is allocated to production of cereal crops. And that is by far the largest area for cereal crops, with sorghum next at 23 million hectares. And the production of maize is reaching almost 70 million metric tons. And that's close to triple the second cereal crop, sorghum. Then also the yields are double of sorghum and are only matched by rice and wheat. Currently, fertilizer use on the continent is about 3.3 metric tons. That translates to about 2.5 metric tons of nutrients. It's only 2% of global share, but maize actually accounts for the greater part of the fertilizer consumption, as I will show in my future slides. One spatial representation of maize production on the continent shows that maize production is actually concentrated in very specific regions. And if we look at the major maize producing countries that are exceeding 3.3 million metric tons, they are very much concentrated in the maize-based systems in East and Southern Africa. And then in West Africa, Nigeria stands out also as one major maize producing countries. So we see that the maize production is concentrated in very specific regions, mostly in sub-humid zones that have favorable climatic conditions for maize production. And if you look at the trends, from the 60s, we see that maize area has been increasing substantially. And part of the major concern is the encroachment of maize in more marginal climatic conditions and more fragile soils as well. So land area allocated to maize is almost tripled from about 15 million hectares to about 40 million hectares as of 2017. But then in the same period, crop yields have only increased marginally from 1 ton to about 2 tons. So this is a major issue of concern, because the increase in maize, overall increase in maize production on the continent has been mostly achieved by extensive production through area expansion with very small increases. And this contrasts sharply with other regions in the world, including South Asia, which had comparable yields with Sub-Saharan Africa, in the 60s. So maize occupies almost 24% of farmland. It's a main staple for more than 50% of the population, though that's very significant. And then also it accounts for 30 to 40% of overall fertilizer consumption on the continent. Then we do recognize that part of the factors that have constrained the yield in Africa are very, complicated, and issues of climate variability only increasingly become a major limitations. Pests and diseases, I think the issue of locusts in East Africa has been a big issue over the last few years. Then poor agronomy in general has been a major constraint. But then the topic of our discussion today, I want to just place a spotlight on the issue of inadequate and incorrect nutrient management, which accounts for a large part of the yield gaps. So I do recognize all these multiple constraints. In the previous webinar, there was a lot of discussions around climate smart management, particularly in maize systems. And today I just want to focus a lot more on the issues around the nutrition of maize on the continent. And just to reflect also why plant nutrition is important, there are all these challenges that affect maize productivity ranging from land availability, water, biotic constraints, climate change, post-harvest losses. But when we rate severity of the constraints, we do recognize that nutrients are the most limiting nutrient in maize production on the continent. Then why specifically soil fertility and plant nutrition a big challenge on the continent? There are two key factors I wanted to draw attention to. One is the complex variability and also the inherently poor fertility of the major soils that part of the major crop production and maize production systems. And there are a whole host of limitations that inherently, even before forests are cleared for maize cultivation, the soils in Africa are some of the oldest, highly weathered and leashed, and also having a lot of limitations. Just an example of the oxazoles in Kenya, which acidic, high P fixing with a very strong deficiency of P, and then alphisols, sandy soils with very low organic matter in Southern Africa, which are very susceptible to degradation. So large parts of the continent are characterized with these soils, which are inherently infertile. And then beyond the inherent low fertility of the soils, there are issues on management. Nutrient depletion is a major challenge that affects the continent now. And I wanted to highlight that the countries that are most affected by the highest losses of nutrients are actually in the maize production systems, with the largest producers of maize, and maize accounts for large parts of the areas where nutrients are being depleted. So annually, nitrogen losses is between 20 to 40 kgs of nitrogen per year. Similar trend for P and K also, and this has been the situation. The picture over the many decades, resulting in very depleted soils across the board. And if we look at the balance sheet, what is really driving this negative balances? Very low fertilizer use. On average, fertilizer use in mostly maize-based systems is about 11 kgs of nitrogen per hectare, 3 kgs of P, and only 2 kgs of K. How about organic matter? It's normally proposed as an option for an alternative source of nutrients. We even have less nutrients that are coming in from organic matter, so there's a limited scope for organic resources, which is only about half of the nutrients that organic resources are actually contributing compared to fertilizer already. And then the removal of nutrients are in the order of 34 kgs of nitrogen, 8 kgs of P, and 21 kgs of K, resulting in the negative balance scenario that I've alluded to in the map that I've shown earlier. Now, the problem of nutrient depletion is not just limited to loss of nutrients, but also to loss of organic matter. We conducted a study many years ago looking at chronosequences of land clearance when woodlands and forests are cleared to produce maize under low input management by smallholder farmers. So by analyzing carbon in fields cultivated under similar management for different ages, we could recreate the long-term dynamics of soil organic matter, which clearly shows that the low input systems trigger very rapid losses of organic matter, especially in the initial years of cultivation, the first 5 years of cultivation, rapid loss of organic matter, reaching about 50% of the organic matter that was initially under, forest conditions. And similar in clay soils, we also observe initially higher organic matter, which are almost double of those under sandy soils, but also the organic matter losses are almost 50%. So there is a big challenge on a sustainable management of the soil resource base and land degradation under the low input system with all these rapid losses in organic matter, but also the big consequences also on greenhouse gas emissions as well, from the low input systems. And then if we look more closely, we see these high losses of carbon in the order of 9 tons and 20 tons of carbon. And if we further delve deeper to understand how the dynamics of carbon are changing due to the newly established maize systems, our analysis clearly showed that the largest part, almost 90% of the organic matter that is available in long-term conditions is actually recalcitrant organic matter that was originally in the native vegetation, because very little organic matter is coming from the new systems shown by the open symbols below. So this clearly shows the low productivity of the system, contributing very little to organic matter in the long term, from maize. However, there is a clear opportunity for enhancing the supply of carbon and soil organic matter situation in these soils, because when we looked at the contrasting systems where high amount of fertilizers were used with a higher production of organic matter, we actually observed that there is greater amount of total carbon in those soils, but plus also the open symbols, which is the organic matter coming from the maize in the soils, is actually much greater than the baseline organic matter of recalcitrant carbon, originally in under woodland. So by increasing fertilizer use, managing fertilizer well, increasing crop productivity, you generate higher yields, but also concomitantly higher organic resources that, when returned to the soils, can help drive improved carbon sequestration in the soils. So this shows some of the potential for carbon sequestration that exists in the soils, with the potential of 30 tons of carbon sequestered from well-managed maize production systems, compared with the current management systems that are contributing less than 5 tons of carbon per hectare. Now, as part of the characteristics, I just wanted to also draw attention to the highly variable systems. So within farms, because of variable management, this is the phenomena of soil fertility gradients, where the first picture on the left shows an infield, well-managed, more productive, and more responsive to fertilizer and manure, and then an outfield, a poor soil with very degraded soils that give no responses at all to fertilizer, and responses only achievable with large manure application over the long term. So this shows that there are very short range, profound heterogeneity in soils that is driven not just by inherent soil properties, but also management imposes a major effect on variability at the local level. And this is field closer to the homestead, receiving more manure, and then an outfield with poor management. Then that previous slide was for Zimbabwe, an area where I did a lot of work, but also a picture from a colleague who did similar work in Western Kenya also shows that the profound heterogeneity in maize responses within the farms is also profound. The poor resource farm with a very poor yield across the farm compared with the higher resource farm with a very good yield and more responsive soils as well. So I would bring this back again as I talk about some of the variability in the spatial nutrient response patterns. And one key challenge that has been brought to the fore is the high yield gaps in Africa. So currently, maize yields are about 2 tons per hectare, and attainable yields are in the order of 6 to 8 tons per hectare, which presents a yield gap of more than 6 tons. But also there is a big challenge of a gap with nutrient use efficiencies. Even with the low fertilizer use currently, agronomic use efficiencies at the farm levels, they have remained very limited. And despite potential of achieving agronomic efficiency of 25 kgs grain of maize per kilogram of fertilizer used, the current agronomic efficiencies are well below 50% of what should be achievable. So if even with the small nutrients that are being added, if they were managed optimally, we could actually double the yields by enhancing the efficiency of the use of those nutrients. So this highlights the need for improved management, also not just increasing nutrients, but also increasing the nutrient recommendations. So to highlight key messages from this section, multiple constraints pose a major challenge for maize production, but there is the caveat of complex variability in soil fertility, linked to soil types, landscape issues, management issues, and also at the farm level, very short range management variability driven by multiple factors, with management being an overriding constraint. So with this context, what is the scope and what is the picture of the patterns of maize nutrient responses in major maize producing regions on the continent? In APNI, we have had a major investments in our maize research programs for many years, and I'm going to draw from sites on our major maize research programs in several countries in East Africa and then also in Nigeria. But we also have these areas representing the high maize producing areas and also the areas where nutrient depletion has been a major concern. And we also have other maize research programs that are currently going on in Senegal, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, and in Togo as well. And this provides a picture of the footprint of our maize, main maize research programs. One key tool that we have used in our research processes are the nutrient omission trials that provide us with a tool for determining nutrient-limited yield gaps by setting an NPK treatment and a set of nutrients where we omit one of the macronutrients to give a measure of the responsive potential of that nutrient in a specific field. In some of our sites, we have added treatments with secondary micronutrients, and then also with other amendments like manure and lime to also assess the response of non-macronutrient interventions in maize production. So I will draw my analysis today from 3 core projects that have been published in 3 major publications. One focusing on Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Tanzania, but I'll put a spotlight on Nigeria and Ethiopia with 492 sites and 1 or 2 seasons. Then we also have another experiment established across multiple countries in Kenya, Malawi, Tanzania, Nigeria, with more than 320 sites, and then also implemented for 1 to 2 seasons. And then at local level sites that are used to explain some of the temporal aspects, which a study conducted in Western Kenya over 10 continuous seasons over the same spot. So just to give a quick snapshot of the nutrient response profiles, we observe that based on the location of the countries, and this has a lot to do with the major agroecological system and also with the major soil types. So we do see quite a variable range of NPK and secondary and micronutrient response profiles. But a key message is across board, nitrogen is the most limiting nutrient, accounting for more than 40% of responses, which can get to almost 80% response in the major maize production areas in Ethiopia. This is essentially because Ethiopia highlands have some of the most fertile soils with high P potassium concentrations, and then that they can support large responses to nitrogen. And then in Kenya, highly degraded soils, oxysoils, highly leached in Western Kenya with high P fixing soils account for a large P response ratio. And then sandier soils in Nigeria, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe do show a more wider distribution of responses. So from looking at the major soils and agroecological zones, we can be able to explain a large part of these nutrient response profiles. And then zeroing in into the first study I want to address, looking at the nutrient omission trials done in Nigeria and in Ethiopia. One key aspect that I want to highlight here is the wide range of attainable yields. So we do observe that 3 tons per hectare maize is normally considered to be the break-even point for achieving the first step of the African Green Revolution, or also in terms of economics of fertilizer use as well. So almost 10% of the sites fail to get to that break-even point. And then also, we do see a wide distribution of these attainable yields. These are yields with NPK added, with the maximum yields of about 10 tons per hectare, and with a wide range, in the upper quartile and lower quartile, and then also the median value. And irrespective of this wide heterogeneity, we can plot control yields versus yield of NPK responses. Sorry, the axis here on the Y is actually NPK response here, which actually gives us a sense of broader categories of response that we can derive, where we have low response degraded soils in this lower range here of NPK response. And then at the middle level, where the higher level, where fields respond poorly due to high fertility, so these are soils with high indigenous nutrient supply. And then also we have this middle part with a worldwide range of variable responses as well. And if we zoom in, looking at the response patterns with control yields plotted against NPK responses, which are the crosses, and then the PK responses, the empty symbols, we see the end response, which is the difference between the two curves in this graph, shows stronger responses in depleted soils in Ethiopia due to the nature of the more responsive, nitrogen responsive soils, which decreases as soil fertility increases, as indicated by the higher control yields. We do find a similar response pattern for P, but with lower responses across the wide spectrum of the control yields. And then we also observe P response also diminished, K response also diminished in the C figure, and even smaller responses to secondary micronutrients, irrespective of the status of the control yields. But then in a more lower fertile soils situation in Nigeria, we observe a very different pattern where response to nitrogen is large across the wide spectrum. So we don't have the diminishing response with increasing nitrogen, with increasing control yields, essentially because of the sandier and lower fertility of the soils as well. So in this part, from your very low fields to your very high control yields, we find almost a similar range of nitrogen response, which is about 2 to 3 tons per hectare on average. And then the same pattern also with P. And what we observe with K is K tends to be more responsive in the higher yielding sites, most likely due to the higher demand of K, but that response tends to be very marginal and even less so for secondary and micronutrients. And one key aspect that we analyzed very closely is the correlation between responses with soil analysis information. And what we observed for this study sites in Nigeria, the relative response PK here based on the formula actually shows your inverse response to nitrogen. So the lower your relative yield response to PK, the higher your response to nitrogen is. So when you plot this response of nitrogen with K, we do not see any strong relationship between soil N with the N response. But when we look at available P, we also see a very complicated pattern. But what's very interesting is the large parts of the more responsive soils in this quadrant actually show that they are mostly fields with less than 10 ppm of P, which is normally considered to be the critical value. But within this critical value of available P, there's still a wide range of soils that are above 1, which shows no response to P at all. And then we do observe a similar pattern of K, where 0.2 centimole per kilogram of K depicts the critical values, and we do see that there is a strong concentration of points in this quadrant, but still there's such a wide range, which shows some of the limited scope that exists for explaining some of these response patterns with soil analysis information. We see this as a repeating pattern in a very concentrated site in Western Kenya, which also shows that below 10 ppm, that's where we have the largest concentration of our responses. And then also below 0.2 ppm, that's where we also find the largest response to K. But there's such a wide range that we normally find soil analysis more valuable for diagnostics rather than for field-specific fertilizer recommendations. And then drawing attention to the study that we did with Kehara et al., this is also published, we can actually identify characteristic clusters that can help us to target recommendations. When we plot the different responses against NPK, we do see various clusters that are explained by the responsiveness of the sites of this. The different symbols are all different soils, and we see quite a characteristic pattern that we can summarize in 5 characteristic responses, and these are non-responsive degraded soils, and also multiple deficiencies associated, with micronutrients plus also manure, organic matter adding a lot of responses, and then also low responsive soils that reach 3 tons per hectare, but not able to reach the full attainable yield due to other limitations. And then we have the severe N deficiency. I showed earlier that nitrogen accounts for the largest part of the responses. So we have sites that show very large responses to nitrogen. So when nitrogen is omitted, yields are below 3 tons, but when nitrogen is added, even without adding P and K, we are reaching almost 6 tons per hectare in those soils. And then the last category is the non-responsive fertile soils. These are soils that normally receive large amounts of nutrients and manure, resulting in very high fertility in those soils, and they don't respond in 1 or 2 seasons of nutrient applications. Trying to explain some of these characteristics, especially on the non-responsive soils, which present the most complex challenges for management, we do see some contrasting parameters when we contrast specifically with the non-responsive fertile soils. Organic carbon is almost half, and then high aluminium concentrations as well can be one factor. And then we also observed a very low concentration of zinc and boron as well. But these are all very complex and multiple factors that presents multiple diagnostics that we need to better understand some of the reasons why those soils respond very poorly to all the application of nutrients. But one key and exciting analysis that we've done is when it comes to secondary micronutrients, we can actually correlate them very well to soil types. So, for example, in clay soils, we have the largest responses of about 2 tons per hectare, and veggie soils also show very strong responses. So, soil types can also provide, from a partial perspective, some information that could be used to identify areas where micronutrients are a major limiting factor. So, to highlight some of the key issues in this section, the complex heterogeneity in yield and nutrient responses is a key issue, especially both at regional scale, country scale, and coming down to the farm and field level as well. And then response clustering approach can provide a way of developing typologies for simplifying and targeting recommendations. And we observed that soil analysis has limited value for field level recommendations due to many multiple and interacting factors. And but the greater value really is for constrained diagnosis. Nitrogen remains the most limiting nutrient, accounting for more than 40% of the nutrient responses. So paying close attention to precise nitrogen management should be a core interest in nutrient management strategies due to the nature of the highly susceptibility of nitrogen for losses and its implications, on leaching as well as gaseous losses and greenhouse gas emissions. And the response to other nutrients and amendments is very site-specific, and there are indications of soil types and management that can be used to target those responses as well. So there are major challenges for managing degraded soils, and there are new research initiatives that are now zooming into the biological, chemical, and physical aspects of constraints to provide us with the right information for providing the correct interventions. Then I want to spend a few minutes looking at the temporal dimensions of nutrient dynamics in maize-based systems, And this builds on our study in Western Kenya with 24 nutrient omission trials conducted for 10 consecutive seasons. We did find very interesting contrasting NPK responses in very short ranges. These are fields that are only 100 meters apart, but one field shows very strong responses to P and no response to K, and the neighboring field shows very strong responses to K, but very minimal response to P. And so this gave us a very interesting setting to track P, K, and N dynamics in the soils that showed these drastic differences in NPK responses within such a short range, mostly driven by soil types and previous management. So what we observe is obviously we do get strong variability in NK responses because on the lower part P is limiting, and we also get wide variability in NP responses because at this lower level K is limiting, and when we apply N, P, and K together, we increase yields but also limit the variability. So in areas where a homogeneous management regime is required to reduce risk, a more balanced approach can provide simple recommendations that would work for most of the farmers. But having said this, we could actually separate our fields based on previous manure application. So we did find that fields that had previously received manure showed higher yields consistently across all the nutrient response patterns compared to the open box plots that fields that had not received any manure application in the past. So this shows that soil management, especially with regards to manure, has a major implication on responsiveness, to manure application. And this is in one season. And then we followed through this for another 6 seasons. And even after 7 seasons, we were not able to offset the differences between the sites that had manure applied in the past and the sites that had no manure applied in the past. That response remained very consistent. And this just shows that management effects impose long-term conditioning of the soils, and the soil's memory to management can be very, very long indeed. And if we look now at how nutrients were changing over time, we observe that we get the red bar is the nitrogen response in the first year. Nitrogen is initially limiting, and it worsens over time as the seasons increase. And then P, the blue symbol, initially very low response, but over time it increases to almost 2 tons after 6 seasons of response. Whilst K also increases over time, but at much lower rate of deficiency compared to P. So strong initial N deficiency and increased severity with non-application, which shows the N response here in the NK in the PK plot, and then initially low P deficiency, but it is enhanced with non-application over the long term, and K tends to remain very moderate due to the buffering of the soil supply. And if we look at these clusters, they clearly show the increasing N limitations over time. N is initially deficient and increase over time, and P tends to be induced very rapidly within short seasons, although there are some other sites that are more resilient. And then K is mostly separated by sites. So sites with more resilient soils show that we don't easily induce K deficiency, even if you don't apply it for many seasons. And we also see that when soils are susceptible to K deficiency, they tend to also rapidly get depleted over time as well. So this shows the need for long-term surveillance and monitoring of nutrient deficiencies for us to come with sustainable nutrient management recommendations. So a key highlight here is the transient P stocks that need close monitoring over seasons to sustainably manage P in the soils. So just to highlight this section, the expression of nutrient deficiencies are highly transient and dynamic, and static recommendations based on one season tend to be very limited relevance for the medium and long term. So I just want to finish my presentation in the next 5 minutes by providing a highlight on how we are integrating all these concepts and principles that we developed from our broad scope of maize research, by giving this case study of our process where we developed the nutrient expert for maize management, system. It's based on a very simple concept of site-specific nutrient management, which focuses on setting a target yield and determining how much nutrients you need to reach that target yield. And that information, we derive it from the nutrient omission trials. So to reach the target yield and get the full amount of nutrients required, nutrients can come from organic resources or the soil, which form the indigenous nutrients component. And then also nutrients can be derived from fertilizer, which is a key part, of our nutrient management, recommendations. So a yield target determines the overall nutrient requirements, and the yield response indicates the deficient nutrients to be supplied by fertilizers based on several factors, including soil fertility, climatic conditions, farmer management practices, as I've described, as some of these are the key drivers of the indigenous nutrient supply potential. And then we do have these categories of nutrient responses that are very much related to how we have analyzed, some of the clustering of our data, which shows on a fertile soil, most of the nutrients come from the native supply and very limited nutrients response from fertilizer. And in a poorer soil, we have very low nutrient supply from indigenous sources, and we need higher rates of fertilizers to reach our yield target. But we do also have that category of very high soils, which have nutrient saturation, and we get very limited need for fertilizers to reach our target yield. But then on the contrary, we also have the degraded soils, where yields are very low, irrespective of fertilizer use and manure application, and we need investments to rehabilitate those sites. And we captured this in a systematic framework of developing in an empirical-based decision support system that integrates farm and extension knowledge and external information on climate and soils, and develop Pests models for determining the nutrient requirements for target yield. And then we use decision rules based on some of the key processes that determine NPK responses. And we develop a recommendation in a participatory and iterative way, working with the extension systems, validate them before we release the final version that is based on in detailed understanding of the nutrient dynamics in the systems where we develop nutrient expert. And this is all packaged in a decision support tool, computer-based and mobile device also operated, that can then be used by extension workers to develop recommendations with outputs that can be printed and provided to farmers. We are also able to do economic analysis, which also is a key aspect of performance assessment of the recommendations as well. So a quick view of how nutrient expert performed relative to regional blanket recommendations and soil testing recommendations. We show that the recommendations provided by nutrient expert were meshed the yields of regional best recommendation and soil test best recommendation. The small yield penalty here was actually nutrient expert suggesting lower yields, which would provide a more efficient target of a nutrient application rate. So we need to balance target yield relative to efficiency. And what's very interesting is nutrient expert increased gross margins, and a key driver for this was reducing the cost of fertilizer by more than 50% versus regional recommendation, and almost 70% versus the soil test-based recommendations. And we also achieved increased fertilizer use efficiency, by more than 30% versus the blanket regional best recommendations as well with nutrient expert. So this shows high potential for crop-based approaches based on diagnostics with nutrient omission trials and packaging that into a systematic process of developing recommendations. And this gives us a key basis for achieving the triple win: increased yields, increased income, plus also increased fertilizer use efficiency, which is required for sustainable intensification. We were involved in a project for scaling nutrient expert recommendations in Nigeria with OCP, and the program there reached more than 20,000 farmers with farm-specific recommendations. And there are key highlights that using to end my presentation, which shows that for 92% of the farmers, it was their first time to access nutrient and crop management recommendations. So the need for providing solutions for informing farmers goes beyond just nutrient recommendations or technical issues. Farmers are not accessing the information that they need to improve recommendations. Only 8% of farmers had any extension worker provide them with their specific recommendations for their farm. We also observed 65% increase in yield and 49% increase in income at this large scale, showing high potential for impact. But so to highlight this section, this site-specific nutrient management approach, based on some of the analysis that we did on the spatial and temporal patterns of nutrient responses, show a very strong predictive potential for improving recommendations based on very simple criteria of current yields, current management, soil types, and then integrating soil analysis data where available. Nevertheless, there are some limitations with this approach due to some of the empirical best processes and the inadequacy in addressing some of the complex interactions between crops, soils, and water, and then also the cumbersome process of multiple location trials over multiple seasons and the validation process, which tends to increase the cost, but also the challenges associated also with managing trials across wide and representative areas as well. And then some of the more constraints for scaling associated with the need for one-on-one extension service provision at the farm level. As we look forward, in our new strategy in APNI, we have some exciting new research initiatives that are in the working, building on this wealth of knowledge that we've generated over wide areas over many years. And we are going to work in zero-based systems in addition to the tree crop-based systems. And a lot of these principles that I've addressed today on maize are applicable to wheat and rice as well, and other cereal crops. So it's going to be a broad-based, cereal crop-based system that will move from just empirical relationships to looking more at machine learning, big data, and geospatial analytics for precision plant nutrition. And then also integration of digital crop and soil-based diagnostic tools for local level application and improving provision of and reliability of recommendations as well. And then moving beyond crop-specific recommendations to cropping system-based recommendations, focusing on the holistic performance of the systems as well. So intercrops, crop rotation, but not just looking at economics and yield, but also on the social ecosystem functions of the system as well. And then more explicitly, integration of climate and weather data and analytics into nutrient management recommendations for climate change adaptation and mitigation. And perhaps more important, starting to also initiate new partners and partnerships for business models that will allow us to develop cost-effective and scalable digital nutrient management information platforms that could then be used by last-mile service providers to tailor recommendations to specific farms. So a lot of this information that I've presented today is available in the publications indicated here, and I'm indebted to the co-authors in most of these publications who were the brainchild behind the concepts and the results that I have presented today. With this, I want to acknowledge the audience and Professor Bolo. I also thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'll be pleased to hear some comments from the audience as well as any questions for further clarification.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zingore, for this insightful presentation and very useful and rich with factual data from the field. Thank you very much. Many people have appreciated your presentations, and the counts show about 62 viewers of this webinar, the latest count. And we have people from America, from the University of Georgia, to Nairobi, to many other places that people did not mention, but I'm just guessing. So very good. We will start our questions, and I'll start from the beginning as the questions have come along. And let me see. So we had even one of our many professors from UM6P. Very good. So let me just find some questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the first question by our friend, Professor Lamari, who is he's an INRA researcher, an outstanding researcher, and he's an he's an affiliated professor to UM6P. He contributes to many of our courses at the Fertilizer Science and Technology program at ESAFE. So his question is, do African countries have soil fertility maps or crop suitability maps?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Professor Lamari. This is a very pertinent question. It is said that there is more known about the soils in Mars than what is known about the soils on the continent. This is one statement that was put forward when a new soil mapping initiative, the APSIS project, was started about 10 years ago, when it was establishing the new digital soil mapping project. So there are soil maps available, but the challenge is the scale and the obsolete nature of those maps. The different initiatives like the APSIS project is invested in digital technologies for soil mapping, and a soil map, digital soil map is available, I think, for Ethiopia, Tanzania, Nigeria, but these are very limited, countries. Then there are other soil information maps available from ISRIC as well. I think at a scale of almost 1 kilometer grids as well. And these are soil maps generated both from studying, past survey work and also with, digital, statistics and extrapolation maps. But there's a lot of validation that is needed, for those maps as well. The scale of the maps is a key challenge, the validation, because these are all maps done by statistical processes. That's a key issue. So I'll say those are the two limitations. And then there are several crop suitability maps based mostly on agroecological conditions, mostly done by FAO as well, that provides a description and the major characteristics of the farming systems across the continent as well.
Okay, may I just compliment Dr. Zingore's answer by saying that presently the OCP Foundation is funding a program for soil fertility mapping and crop fertilization. And it's a program in which UM6P is contributing, and maybe will be using your expertise at one point in time, Professor Zingore, and maybe we will use your knowledge to contribute to this program. The program is, yes.
Yes, I was going to say that a key part of what we need to do is to actually integrate soil information with crop information concurrently. Because we have observed that in several countries where soil maps were done without the validation and complementary analysis, of crop response information, there was a big mismatch between the information on the maps and the actual responses that we derived from fertilizer. So integrating soil information with crop nutrient, uptake information would be an important process for getting the maps right. Yes, I will just take over from the moderator. It seems his mic is muted for now. So just to address the question.
Okay. Yeah, let me start again. I said here is your second question from another outstanding researcher of INRA, or at least he has just retired from INRA Morocco. He was stationed in Settat, and he's the number one weed specialist in Morocco. And that explains his question. Of course, he thanks you for your presentation. And he's asking the question, is striga a real weed problem for corn production in several African countries? And what integrated management do you recommend? As someone who knows what happens on the field.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Abbas, for your very important question. Yes, striga is a big menace to maize production, and due to its parasitic nature, very complicated also to manage. So I think you rightly identified the need for integrated management practices. And several, processes have been put forward as part of the key set of management practices that could be used to manage striga. One is obviously crop rotation by growing, other legume crops or other type of crops that do not provide host for striga, and then that way we are able to control, the proliferation of striga. And then other integrated management practices also include managing soil fertility. The research has shown that striga is less prevalent in more fertile soils. So by managing soil fertility, we actually suppress striga. So that's a very integrated way where weed and soil fertility management can actually be linked together to concurrently address multiple challenges as well. Then other management practices are associated with reducing the seed bank of striga by letting the fields go fallow for some time, but then it also has limited opportunities because of limited land size that farmers can, allocate to, to striga. And then there are other mechanical processes for managing striga to just minimize its impact during the season as well.
Okay, thank you, Professor Zingore. I will take this opportunity to ask our friend, Professor Abbas Tanji, to accept kindly to contribute to our webinar series by a webinar on weed control in Africa. So that way he will share his knowledge with the rest of African weed specialists throughout the continent. Thank you very much for contributing very regularly to our webinars. And so here is my invitation extended to you to contribute personally to these webinars and talk about the weed control in tropical and subtropical countries. Thank you very much, Professor Abbas. Many of our students are asking whether they will be getting any attestation for participating in these webinars. And I'm happy to see that many students or doctoral candidates are participating. And my friend, Dr. Zingore, now you have contributed to educating future doctors in agriculture. Yes, we will be in touch with you. And I guess our manager has given a response to your question. If you just keep in touch, we will see who has requested these attestations, and we'll make sure that these attestations are and forwarded to those who need them. Okay? Very good. Okay. Okay, there is this from Dr. Tegbaturu Bellete. I apologize for any mispronunciation. Is thanking you, Dr. Zingore, for your insightful presentation. And he adds that the soil fertility statutes and cropping systems in Africa is extremely varied and complex. Supporting biophysical data are mostly uneven. And I think that's what you have been talking about. If you wish, you might elaborate on this statement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do have this complex variability, but it's not unmanageable. That's, I think, the key point, that as we combine crop-based approaches with soil-based approaches, climate processes, and then also farmer information, we are able to start zoning into specific categories that could help us to reduce this complexity. And I think the key interest of recommendations in this broad, wide, and highly variable setting is not necessarily to have every farmer apply the most precise plant nutrition recommendation, but to reduce the uncertainty in the recommendation as the next step. As farmers move from 2 tons, for example, to 3-4 tons, reducing that uncertainty is crucial. And then moving from 4 tons to 6 tons would then require a lot more precision management. So I think this is a comment that is highlighting, the key challenge that we face in providing recommendations, the profound variability.
Okay, here is now a real question by the same author, the same expert, plus how actual states of the soil's fertility can be optimized for low potential soils inherently. Example for maize cropping system. Did you get this question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a very pertinent question. Thank you so much, Mr. Bellete. It goes back to the issues on degraded soils or low fertility soils. with a whole complex set of limiting factors. So ensuring that we understand the nutrient limitations in those soils, and then applying the correct balance of nutrients is very fundamental. But then we recognize that other constraints are associated with low organic matter. So there are soils where we are not able to achieve any reasonable increase in productivity unless we address soil organic matter. Then the question then comes, how do we access the adequate and the correct quality of organic matter, that is required, for managing those poor soils? And this has been the big challenge. In systems where manure is available, that's a very important resource. But where manure is not available, crop rotations with legumes can provide high quality, organic resources, harnessing biological nitrogen fixation to improve nitrogen supply and organic matter, plus also starting to think about balanced fertilization as an entry point to increase productivity, increase availability of organic resources, like the figure I showed on commercial farming systems where high maize yields resulted in high organic matter, which was actually a key factor in sustainable soil fertility management in those systems. But when soils are already infertile, we need to ensure that we get an appropriate balanced fertilizer management regime to reactivate productivity. But then some of the limitations are not necessarily limited to nutrients or organic matter. Soil acidity is a major factor across large parts of the continent. In Ethiopia, for example, more than 50% of the cropland is acidic and high aluminium toxicity. So liming is inescapable if we are going to address, the conditions, under the, acidic, soils as well. So just to put it in short, diagnostics followed by appropriate interventions that allow us to correct specific limitations would be the correct procedure to address the problems of infertile soils.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this clarification. And here is a question from our friend and your neighbor next door, Professor Khalil Al-Mujahid. Do you know him?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Professor Khalil.
So he's thanking you, and he adds some comments, and he finishes by some question. He says, available tools improved yields, but adoption is a problem. Do you think we should develop policies, capacities, technology transfer, and extension, and reduce research costs temporarily? Do you accept this? This
Thank you, Professor Khalil, again. I would actually, reform the question into a very good recommendation. So instead of "do you think," I actually say, I remove "do you think." I would actually start it "we should." So what he mentions here are key pressure points that part of the value chain processes that we need to get a good handle on in ensuring scalability and impact also of our technologies. Policies are essential. A lot of extension systems are supported with, for example, policies on government subsidy programs or government knowledge transfer programs. So that's a key part. Capacity is an issue. And then also the whole ecosystem and the whole infrastructure of the tools, and then also the technologies that are used in knowledge transfer. I think we need to revolutionize our processes and take advantage of ICT frameworks, but also build into a lot of new innovations and startups that are developing very exciting farmer outreach, programs that are cost effective. So there are so many exciting platforms that are, in place that we could actually connect with. And some with UM6P, I think there are several initiatives that are looking at building these platforms as well. And obviously the important part is we have to move things to extension. As I indicated in our work with OCP in Nigeria, we reached more than 20,000 farmers, and 92% of the farmers had any source of extension information whatsoever. So that's a big gap. And it's not one solution, but it has to be integrated and multiple collaboration initiatives that link and build capacity for the value chains that are supporting farmers. Plus also, we also need to recognize the importance of involving farmers and working directly to ensure that what we provide is relevant, demand-driven, and also it meets the expectation of the farmers as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zingore. I think our webinars are, they represent the channel of spreading and sharing in scientific information. And I would like to share this insight and statement by our friend Alfred Jennison about controlling of striga. He says striga can be managed by crop rotation using Gossypium spp. And he says Gossypium spp has a strigol which can reduce the density of striga in the following growing season. That's very good to know, which means that obviously we cannot recommend with great certainty the rotation of maize with Gossypium, cotton with maize. Do you see any problem in this type of rotation, Dr. Zingore?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. Alfred, for expanding on the area, conversation on the, potential value of rotations for controlling striga. Definitely, Gossypium is one option that is available, and we just need to pay attention to ensuring that whatever rotation is put into effect recognizes the value chain and the needs and the demands of the farmers as well. So from just a striga management perspective, Gossypium is very effective, due to its effect directly on reducing the persistence of striga. But then we also need to start thinking also about the systems perspective, about how farmers can manage the overall system, and also the value of Gossypium, as part of an overall system. So I just wanted to add that component of ensuring that the systems are taken into account in deciding on the specific rotations for striga management.
Okay, thank you. Here is another expert, Mr. Peter Simon Quare. He also thanks you for your presentation. And he says he has noticed increasing variability within treatments with seasons, season 1 versus 7. He asks you, what do you think causes this?
Yes, we actually analyze our data, and much of that variability is actually coming from local level weather variability in that specific season. So for most of the other seasons, we actually showed reduced variability over time. So for example, if we look at the first season compared with the fourth season, there was a large reduction in that variability. But the seventh season was associated, even though we were working in a very small area, it was associated with high local level variability in the rainfall distribution, and that accounted for large part of that variability.
Okay, very good. Well, apparently your answers have aroused interest by our friend Belletti, Mr. Belletti. And he says, I'm wondering what scientific approaches APNI is putting in place to standardize methods to capture the variability towards attaining precise nutrient management and at the plot level.
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad to inform as part of some of those key points that I highlighted as our current and future interest in our new strategy in APNI. Part of that is actually developing the standardized methodologies and processes that build on precise characterization of the systems, because without understanding the systems and their temporal and spatial variability, you cannot move to the next step. So there's also the next part of developing systematic processes linking local measurements with geospatial, soil, climate, and crop information that then provides us with improved locational efficiency of research trials at the local level, and then also building in the extrapolation domains already from the characterization of our work. And we also recognize the value of remote sensing information, spatial information, on vegetation or on climate as well, to help us actually start developing recommendations at the local level as well. And then as part of that process, then we want to then be able to connect with machine learning and data analytics approaches that would help us to untangle this complexity and come up with recommendations that work at different spatial levels right up to the local level. But one key point I also want to highlight is normally we want to front fixed recommendation and give farmers one recommendation, which normally misses some of the complex decision-making processes that farmers have to go through. So part of our interest is to provide information that would then reduce the uncertainty of the farmer making decisions on the season and based on their specific goals and objectives as well. So instead of a research-driven top-down approach, we really want to be able to bring science in a participatory way that it addresses the information and demands of farmers at the local level as well.
Thank you, Dr. Zingore. Apparently, your answers are stimulating more questions and comments. So here is our friend, Dr. Lamari. He says, in general, farmers in Africa are not using recommended nitrogen amounts for different reasons, and more policy and extension efforts are needed. Well, obviously, we have been talking about that, and
right.
His point. Thank you, Professor Lamari, for stressing this point. Okay. Let me see. Yes, this next remark or question from our esteemed Professor Tanji, he is asking, I think, are you willing to include Morocco in your major research areas? Well, of course.
Well,
Morocco is in APNI. He doesn't know that.
I think the key issue today, yeah. I'm so obsessed about maize. So I just took attention to address the issue of maize, but Morocco is certainly a country of major priority for us. We have, projects on wheat. We have a project on lentils. We have projects on olives, citrus, and date palm as well. So those are all programs that are very much topical in our research programs, and we'll be very much keen to connect with all the other related activities that could help us develop new collaboration opportunities in Morocco.
Well, that's good. He comes back again with this ID on this question on soil testing. Soil testing is important in using efficiently nutrient, and more efforts are needed from policy makers to support farmers for that. Obviously.
Yeah, that's an obvious. Thanks again, Professor Lomari. Soil testing has value, but when it comes to smallholder farms, local level, high variability, we do observe quite a lot of complexity in driving recommendations. It's one of the puzzles that must be put together, but there are other factors that can be simpler and provide a much more powerful explanatory capacity. For example, soil types, landscape management, all those are factors that need to be part of the analytical processes of developing recommendations. One key limitations of some of the past work that tried to promote soil testing, it was always done without the due consideration of other key indicators that could actually improve the predictive value of soil information for developing recommendations.
Okay, very good. Well, I cannot skip this question just because of the name. Blessing Magonziwa. Yes. Yes. He thanks you for your presentation, and he has two questions. I don't know whether it's a man or a woman, but anyway, I like the name. The question goes, is there consideration for sociological limitations to nutrient management within your work, i.e. the human dimensions of soil fertility?
Yes, thank you so much, Blessing, for your very thoughtful question. Today, I didn't address in a major way the socioeconomic aspects. This is a key part of both the drivers, of the need for recommendation, and also a key part of tailoring recommendations. So if we just tailor recommendations based on scientific optimal yield targets and recommendations without paying attention to the farmer specific requirements, for example, farmer investment capacity, then the recommendation matches with the reality and the practical application on the ground. So the answer is yes. From a characterization part of our work, for example, I spoke about the farm typology. This is a very much socioeconomic driven process, understanding the farm, their socioeconomic conditions and how that implicates on management. And then we also feed back our recommendations to suit the different types of farmers as well. And I spoke about our nutrient expert decision support tool. It's yes, a component which addresses the farmer expectations in terms of yield targets and matches our recommendations to the expected and the level of investment that the farmer would like to make. But having said this, there are other issues of socioeconomics that would be relevant to our work, and as part of our future programs as well, and as part of our farming systems led research process, we are going to increase and expand our work on understanding the socioeconomic factors and dynamics that influence fertilizer recommendations.
Well, the same, our friend Blessing, coming back with a more precise question. He says, would we still say nitrogen is the most limiting in high phosphorus fixing soils such as oxysoils for maize production?
Yes, I just want to go back to those profiles that I presented earlier. I think this is a question that probably warrants that we relook briefly at this.
Osama, yes, very good.
At these profiles. So if we look closely, nitrogen response is about 50% across all the other sites except Kenya. And Kenya is very much at the center of the high P fixing soils, in the East African, region, and especially the nitty soils and the oxy soils. And we actually see that in this particular location, P slightly.
Can you share your screen?
Oh, okay. Let me try to do that now. All right, we are getting assistance to get my screen in place. Can you confirm if you have the figure?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, now you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let me just recap. If we look at the profiles of the countries where we have had a wide network of trials, all the other countries, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Malawi, show nitrogen responses above 50%. But when it comes to Kenya, nitrogen response about 42%, and P response is actually about 44%. So it actually shows, confirming the point raised, that when you start thinking about soil types, already by understanding the distribution of P-fixing soils like oxy soils, we can actually see where hotspots of high P deficiencies can occur and are prominent. And this is just supporting that in Western Kenya, for example, P is actually slightly edging N as the most limiting nutrient.
Okay, very good. Yes. Now we are getting more questions, more and more questions, but due to time limit, I will only select few ones and few comments. Okay. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Janine Cherrier from the University of Georgia, Athens, for her contribution to this webinar. And I will ask her to convey our greetings to our friend, Professors Cabrera, Professor Glenn, and Musawi, as well as our friend, Victoria, the head of international programs. Well, that's a great opportunity. The new technology allows you to speak to different people, and know who is interested in your activities. Thank you, Janine, for your participation.
Thank you so much, Professor Sharia. We appreciate your audience today, and hope we'll keep the conversation going also in our current and future programs.
Okay, here is another question from Mr. Reda Ben Merid. He says, Dr. Zingore, have these different works been conducted on local varieties of maize? What about the genetic variability of maize in Africa? Do current yields match the potential of the species?
Yes, I think that question pertains to the germplasm, for maize. Yes, just to highlight, so some of the, key research done on open pollinated varieties or local varieties. I think there's a reasonable amount of research work done that actually shows that open pollinated varieties outperform the improved hybrids under unfavorable soil fertility conditions. So when soil fertility is very poor, the more adapted OPVs tend to perform better, but they tend to be less responsive to nutrient applications, on the more responsive, sites. So I think that's, a key, point. Then the one key issue, though, is currently the statistics show that only about 40% of the maize growers at smallholder farms in Africa use improved hybrid maize varieties. So 60% are still using open pollinated varieties, which limits the potential yields in more responsive, sites. So I think that's one key complementary investments in the seed systems that is needed to ensure that farmers have the right varieties to achieve the target yield responses. Do current yields match the potential yields of the varieties? We are far. So I showed that our average yields on the continent about 2 tons per hectare, and the potential yield of those varieties is in excess of 8 tons per hectare. So that's quite a big gap that we can exploit by getting the full set of integrated solutions that are needed to reduce, the yield gap.
Yes, yes. I cannot skip this question. Yeah. Why do we have this eco, Osama?
This question, thank you so much, Dr. Kebede, for the very thought-provoking, question. The issue of whether reliance on inorganic fertilizers, support sustainability of agricultural, systems. So the key issue, I think, is not just about use of fertilizer, but on appropriate use of fertilizer. We have programs like what we call the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Project, which is actually operating in Ethiopia and in Ghana, that is promoting the best set of practices for nutrient management that optimizes productivity and nutrient use efficiencies whilst minimizing the negative effects. But having said this, it's not a one solution in terms of nutrient sources. We need complementary technologies from organic resources that would help us to manage organic matter. But as I alluded to earlier, organic resources are in short supply already. Only a maximum of 5 kgs of nitrogen is coming in from organic resources, and there are inherent limitations in the system that limit the amount of organic matters that farmers can invest in. But then fertilizer use by supporting a higher yields can actually provide an interesting pathway of increasing overall biomass production and then concomitantly providing a source of carbon for maintaining high organic matter. So sustainable systems would definitely depend to a large extent on integrated nutrient management solutions that optimizes crop nutrient uptake, minimizes losses, but also managing the soil fertility conditions of the long term as well. And we also need to pay attention to monitoring and surveillance of changing soil properties. For example, correcting for soil acidity in the long term by liming would be one issue to maintain soil fertility at the high level. And to go back to where I started, actually, the biggest environmental problem we have in Africa is not from use of fertilizer, it's actually from underuse of fertilizer, resulting in nutrient mining and land degradation. So I think we also need to highlight that as an important issue that actually put fertilizer as a solution rather than as a problem.
Okay, thank you. I must just post this. These congratulations to you, of course. And another participants, many thanks, Shami, for your excellent presentation. And this question from Dr. Isaac Newton. Dr. Zingore, nice presentation. I know mitigation measures are implemented for the climate variability.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Isaac. This is a topic that would probably warrant a full webinar. But speaking, briefly, in the mitigation space, I think this responds more to the long-term management of maize production systems to reduce their impact on climate change. So from a bigger scale, the whole process of intensification, I see it as a major intervention, because by focusing on increasing productivity on current land, we actually reduce the need for expansion into native vegetation areas. And if we look at the quantification of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions is deforestation, opening up new land and removing all the above ground carbon, and then also triggering release of organic matter from the soils as well. That's by far the largest contributor. And by intensifying and improving productivity, we reduce the need for that. That's the Bollag hypothesis, right? And then we also pay attention to the mitigation potential of the current crop production systems by ensuring that we support the systems to sequester more carbon. We could look at other system-based interventions, for example, conservation agriculture that support the retention of residues and also improve sequestration of organic matter. Then that increases the function of soils in agricultural systems as a sink rather than as a source of carbon. And then from more precise management of nutrients, for example, nitrogen, we enhance uptake and reduce gaseous losses of the nitrogen oxide gases as well. So these are all various approaches that are part of our interest in our theme area of climate change adaptation and mitigation as well.
Okay, very good. Why do I keep having this echo? Okay, another viewer is asking the question about the data. Was the data on maize response to fertilizer in Nigeria, were they from the northern Nigeria only, or the whole country?
Yes, the case of Nigeria, this was specifically from the maize production areas in the sub-humid zones in the northern part of the country. That's the states around Kano, Kaduna, and Katsina, and that represents the most important maize production zone in Nigeria.
Okay, the same viewer is asking this question about methods and protocols you are using. Did you make use of the AFSIS research protocols on soil management based on what AFSIS has done in the continent?
Yes, we were collaborating with AFSIS because AFSIS were focusing a lot more on the soil information systems. That's what AFSIS represents, for those who may not be familiar, Africa Soil Information Services. So a large part of the work I presented today was done in collaboration with AFSIS, mostly from co-location of sites where AFSIS had sentinel sites for detailed analysis of soil information. And then also we're providing some data that AFSIS were also using to validate some of the soil map information that they were generating for the target countries as well. So we co-developed some of the protocols that we used in research with AFSIS indeed.
Our friend Kibidi is coming back with another question. These are specialists today, they're experts. There you go, right to the point. He says, what options do we have for enhancing maize production in Africa, in addition to nutrient management, especially considering pests, weeds, and diseases management?
Right, I'll probably highlight this, from the start of my presentation. where we observed water is key. For regions where water is available, water management, soil conservation, there are areas where the mitigation space for drought is very low and water is very key. So increasing accessibility to irrigation has to be one of the key. And then the aspects on pest management, I gave example of, this armyworm problem in East Africa. There's the locust problem that is affecting, almost half of the cropland area in East Africa currently. So if we increase productivity without paying attention to integrated pest and disease management interventions, then we make very little headway in dealing with the host of problems that farmers face. And then beyond just production, there's also aspect of post-harvest technologies as well. I think that's one key area where, when farmers even can achieve increased productivity, more than currently, I think the estimates say that 30% of yield crop is lost, by pest damage after harvest. So we also need intervention in that space to minimize crop loss.
I want to show you this. You have also the thanks of Professor Saad Drisi, Professor of Agronomy at the National School of Agriculture in Meknes, where I used to work. So he's thanking you for your nice presentation. He is also an agronomist contributing with us to education and training manpower in Africa in terms of crop fertilization recommendations. He's one of the key players in this field.
Thank you so much. I'd look forward to continuing that conversation.
Yeah, there is another question from, or a comment from another good agronomist from Inara Settat. Thanks for the nice presentation. And he's asking, what is the specific reason behind the very low response of fertilizer to the in the degraded soil?
Thank you so much, Professor Butifirus. This is a very complex issue. It remains a big mystery now, because a lot of research done in the past tried to focus on isolated, interventions for addressing, the problems of non-responsive degraded soils. But they are different hypotheses put forward. One is physical degradation, for example, combustion, which actually affects the establishment of the crops and the rooting systems. Then there are issues related to the biological fertility of the soils, supporting the biological function in a regulation of nutrient responses. And then there is also, thinking of complex nutrient imbalances. For example, in one site, we found an inverse in calcium to magnesium ratio. So for a balanced, so calcium and magnesium, you should have more calcium than magnesium, but we found an inverse, which was actually the key driver for lack of response. And we needed to actually correct that, by applying, by applying gypsum. And so there are chemical, physical, and biological processes, but the way they're expressed can be very complicated. And this is going to be a subject. I also want to highlight that there's a new project that is under finalization now in the proposal between APNI UM6P and Wagner University that's actually going to have a comprehensive approach of not just looking at components of these non-responsive soils, but having a holistic process to come up with substantive diagnosis of what limits the productivity of those soils.
Well, quickly, I will go over some comments, and maybe I will take two questions because we are running out of time. And this is Professor Youssef Dafi of the Amin School, thanking you for your presentation. Thank you, Professor Dafi, see Youssef. And
thank you so much, Dr. Dafi.
Yeah, and we have our friend, Professor Saad Drisi, coming back with another question. He says, is there any research in Sub-Saharan African soils about micronutrient supply for corn, particularly zinc?
Yes, I think the quick answer is there is significant research done, especially with zinc. We do have a good representation of work on assessing the responses and some of the factors that drive zinc response. And studies on zinc actually have gone further to assess the effect of zinc fertilization on the nutritional status of maize produced. And it shows that we could actually increase the zinc content of the grain by fertilization as part of the agronomic biofortification processes as well. But having said this, there are still some major gaps around the interaction of zinc, for example, with phosphorus. By concurrently applying zinc and phosphorus, you end up fixing your zinc and making it unavailable. So these are induced deficiencies from management. And then there are other research questions also around the overall multiple nutrient interactions as part of a balanced nutrient supply system as well.
Okay, because of we are running out of time, and I must go to another meeting. They are calling me for that. And I will just thank you again for this excellent presentation, very insightful, that has incited many comments and questions, many interesting questions right to the point. And I'd like to thank our viewers from the different continents, from America, Africa, and maybe there are other continents. Please, next time, why don't you tell us where you are from, the country and the continent. And that's all. With that, I will turn it to our friend Usama Kasimi, our digital expert, to announce the next webinar for next week and the things that are to come. So, the next webinar will be given by myself. I will be honored and privileged to be able to talk to you about integrated disease management in Africa. I'm just putting concepts forward using the case of wheat disease in Morocco. Knowing that I have been working in this field for a number of decades, I did not publish much in terms of, but we have done lots of research with the students, and all that information is being stored in theses. And I would say it's a little bit, I'm sorry for that, unpublished information. I will get the chance to go over it next week and share my thoughts about fellows and pathologists and agronomists in Africa and worldwide. So I'll be happy to talk to you next week, inshallah. Okay, that's it. And I would like to take this opportunity to make not an announcement, but another announcement about our master's program in fertilizer science and technology. The applications now, we are receiving applications. You still have the chance to send in your application until July 13 or 14. You still have time. We encourage applicants from different countries of the world to get involved in this master's program, in which renowned professors like our friend Dr. SHAMIE ZINGORE will be teaching, inshallah, either parts of the courses or seminars. We would like to involve him directly in this activity, especially that we have we are seeking a balance of 50%, 50-50 Moroccan and Sub-Saharan Africans. We would wish to have more Sub-Saharan Africans, of course, but that's the way it is. We will seek that balance, but whoever candidate whoever interesting candidate is interested in getting involved in this master's program is very welcome and encouraged. I thank you very much, all of you, for your contributions and your kind participation and your valuable questions. Until then, I'll say goodbye. Dr. Zingore.
Bye. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure being with you.
Been my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.